At least 30 people have been killed in renewed violence in the north-central Plateau State. This senseless killings and burning of houses are continued in Mangu town of Mangu local government area of Plateau State, despite the 24-hour curfew imposed by the government. Killings on the plateau have escalated since 2021, and sadly this is the second of such attack in a month. Tonight, I am joined by Dr. Kabir Adamu, security experts, managing director of Beacon Consulting Limited. Dr. Adamu, good evening to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and it's so good to see you again.
My pleasure. Good evening.
Right. So before we get into the kind of our focus tonight, as a security professional, help us paint a picture of the security situation in Mangu local government area and Plateau State as a whole.
At the moment, as you are aware, today is the third day that there has been a 24-hour curfew in place in Mangu local government, and this followed a spate of attacks, which I would describe as inter-community violence between two sides that are divided both by ethnicity and to an extent by religion. Now, at the beginning of that violence, the state government declared a curfew, where it's very difficult to determine the number of people that have been killed. This is the nature of inter-community violence. People are killed as a result of their identity, and because sometimes it's not reported, they are buried almost immediately, especially for the Muslims among them. It has become extremely difficult to determine the number of those that have been killed. The curfew is still in place. Even as today, we monitored or picked up reports of these types of killing between both sides, actually. So that, I think, at the moment is the situation. In the town itself, Mangu town, some sense of stability and peace has been restored. But as you move further out into the villages, these types of targeted inter-community attacks are ongoing, where persons of different divides as a result of either their ethnicity or religion are targeted, and sadly they are killed.
Right, thank you. This last killing that occurred on Tuesday was sparked by a dispute between a native and a Fulani herder in Mangu. My first question is, what really is the issue among the people that makes peace look like a tall dream? And juxtaposing this with a report we played earlier where the governor says, well, I hope I'm able to quote him correctly, he says there are people with intention to divide us. It is until they divide us, they can get what they want. What exactly do these words mean to you?
Okay, the first part of the question, the issue of who is a settler and who is an indigenous, unfortunately, has not been settled in Plateau State, even though it's been settled in our constitution. And I say this with all sense of responsibility. I mean, at the moment, there are persons from different states that are members of the State Assembly in Lagos. And if I'm right, I don't know if it's still the case, there are persons who are not Yorubas that are at the moment representing Lagos at the Federal Assembly. Point I'm trying to make is because this issue is embedded and complied with in a place like Lagos, it hasn't become a challenge. But as you go further out, as you go into places like Plateau State and several parts of north central Nigeria, that issue is very strong, and the provisions of the constitution are not being complied with, they are not respected. So there are certain categories of people that are identified as settlers, others are identified as indigents, and their rights are different, as it were. And so this is part of the challenge, the access to political power, access to land, access to so many other things that determine whether you are a Nigerian, how you enjoy governance is defined by these two terms, whether you're indigent or you are a settler. And unfortunately, I think that's the first thing that is a driver of this unfortunate circumstances that we have in Plateau State. Now, the second point, which I must also say with all sense of responsibility, during the February presidential election and the March governorship election in 2023, a lot of negative mobilization was done along these two lines that I've described earlier on, along ethnic and along religious lines. Unfortunately, it left the state further divided. And I remember cautioning ahead of the elections that post the elections, whoever wins would find it extremely difficult because he will have in his hands, or her hands, in his hands anyway, because there was no female candidate, a state that is divided along these two lines. And so he would probably spend 2 years or thereabout trying to manage the consequence of this negative mobilization along these two lines. So that's number two. Number three is the existence of ethnic militias that have been extremely weaponized. These ethnic militias have access to weapons. They have become instruments for the political outcomes. And I say this without sense of responsibility. Politicians either indirectly or directly instigate them to act in certain instances. And I don't mean just those that are holding political offices. The chain of political command goes down all the way to certain persons in villages and wards. And so they use these ethnic militias for, to create circumstances that would favor certain political outcomes. And then the fourth one is the existence of what I have called marauding criminals that are being engaged sometimes by these ethnic militias or their controllers, the politicians that I talked about. So where, for instance, they feel that these ethnic militias don't have the capacity to achieve the kind of political results they would wish, then these criminal groups would also come into place. Now, I've also heard of the theory that this may be resource-based. It is possible that it is resource-based, and that means, for instance, access to land. And then, of course, even the mineral resources that are supposedly, deposited within the Plateau State. But that theory, for me, does not hold water in the sense that Plateau State has always had minerals. Tin, and I think steel to an extent, and columbite were a large deposits in Plateau State. And I know one of the first places that the federal government invested in the mining sector was in Plateau State, actually a mining corporation, if I'm right, a tin corporation in Plateau State. So the fact that it's being mentioned now, I don't think that's the only reason. So all of this, plus the existence of small arms and light weapons. Now, because the conflict in Plateau State has lasted over a very long period, access to weapons has become a common thing. There is a gun running, I would say, channel that is feeding that. And so you have communities, individuals who are armed. One of the persons who was interviewed did mention that she had gunshots and flying everywhere, and that is a common phenomenon when there is conflict. So the number of weapons in circulation in the hands of persons who are not entitled to have weapons is extremely huge in Plateau State. Now, these are this and then several other reasons that maybe in the course of the conversation I will mention. But I would want to cap all of this to say that in the past, judicial commissions have been, instituted in Plateau State, both administrative and judicial commissions, and they've submitted reports. They've identified all of the issues I've mentioned. I hate to say, as far as I know, that none of the recommendations of those commissions have been implemented. So the point I'm trying to make is there appears to be an absence of political will to address these root causes that I've identified.
All right, I get that, Dr. Damu, but let me be clear. Are you in any way saying the conversations as to whether or not these attacks are more economic than ethnic or religious should be thrown out?
No. All I'm saying is that we should disaggregate the reasons for the attack. The simplification of the reasons is not helping us in any way. If we ignore all of these elements that I've mentioned, then sadly the issues will not be addressed. In addressing the issues, we should understand that there is not just a single factor that is driving it. Everything I've mentioned is a factor. And if we're going to come to, some solution, then we have to put all of those reasons on board. What happened in Barrick, in Ladi, Riom, and to an extent, Bokos, is very different from what is happening in Mangu at the moment. It's a combination of several factors, just like I've listed them. And so putting them on the table. And the amazing thing is that all of these factors have been identified in those commissions of inquiry, the administrative and judicial ones that I mentioned. And so it's not new that it's coming from me. I'm just highlighting them.
Right. So consider the kinds of carnage in Plateau State over the years. I mean, innocent lives as well as properties have been lost. Now, when these attacks happen, all we hear are speculations of possible cause. Is it a time Nigerians knew exactly what and why residents of Plateau are being killed and who these people are?
I think I have attempted to tell you why. I know why the violence in Plateau State is happening, and I just gave you a diagnosis of the reason. But more importantly, I'm a private individual. I'm not a government official. So the responsibility for telling why lies with the government. And I indicated earlier on that commission of inquiry at the state level, and if I remember well, at the federal level, both administrative and judicial have been instituted, and they have submitted their reports. Now, some of these commissions were headed by highly respectable persons. I think the Nikki Toby report is one of them. The former and late, a former governor and late, a one-time chairman of the People's Democratic Party, Solomon Lar, if I remember well, I named them. Several of them have investigated the issues in Plateau State. They've identified the drivers, they've identified the causes, they put recommendations. So this is not hidden. That responsibility is left to government. A white paper should have been produced from those reports and then implemented. I am not aware a white paper has ever been presented. I'm not aware that the recommendations are implemented. So perhaps it's an opportunity for the current governor to be bold, to harmonize these reports, because of course, these things are transient, they change. So maybe some of the reports, there are new things that have emerged. There may be a need to perhaps put together a team, a committee to harmonize those reports. And if there are reasons or, causes that were not captured in those reports because of their emergence now, include them and then be bold enough to implement the recommendations. If that's not done, then the legislature too has that responsibility, both at the state level and at the federal level. But the point I'm trying to make is the government has that responsibility to come out and tell Nigerians what is happening, and then more importantly, to address the reasons.
All right. So one of the reasons I had to ask that question again is because where the police have arrested 9 suspects in connection to the attack in Mangu local government area. I'd like to know the impact of this. And also not forgetting that some suspects were also arrested in connection with the last attack on the plateau in December. Why do we only hear about the arrest and nothing more after that? Is this the failure of the criminal justice system?
Yes, that's one of the causes of the conflict actually in Plateau State. Like I said, when I was listing them out, there were others that I hadn't mentioned. So that's one of them, the failure of both the traditional justice system and then, of course, the more institutionalized criminal justice system. In the past, if there is a conflict between a harder, community, as it were, and then the farmer community, the traditional justice system will step in and nip that conflict in the bud. Sometimes it's just the payment of compensation for destroyed crops. In the case of life lost, it would require something more advanced. But it will be addressed at that level. Then we're waking up to a situation today where both the traditional justice system and then the more institutionalized criminal justice system is not arresting offenders, neither is it punishing them. We've been told by the military, and I'm quoting the military more or less in a release on January 25th, when they cited a altercation, as it were, between herders and a native, a Magavul native, which is the local language in Mangu State. And the narrative by the military said the native, Magavul native, was on his motorbike when he encountered a herder group, and there was an accident and maybe some cows died, and that the result of that, plus some other factors they listed, is the reasons why we saw the number of deaths. So first off, who was that herder person? What happened after that? Who were the persons who armed themselves? Have arrests been made? Why in that briefing was all of these questions not answered? And I think our media team too, they also need to ask those critical questions, because that press briefing was an engagement between the media and the military. I think they should have asked critical questions around, was the person arrested? Those who followed up with the attacks, have they been arrested? Now, with regards to the arrest of the 9 persons that you referred to, it will interest you to know that the communities in Plateau State have reached a point where the trust level between them and the security agencies is so low that whenever such arrests are made, the allegation is that the wrong people have been arrested. Now, this is so deep-rooted that even in the current circumstances, depending on the side you talk to in Plateau State, they will tell you that those that were arrested were not responsible for the killings that occurred in Plateau State. And I think that is the difficulty of the situation that we're in at the moment, that we need to reverse as quickly as possible. The trust that the communities have in the security agencies has been depleted to a point where even when arrests are made, you hear conspiracy theories coming up. So it makes it extremely difficult for the law enforcement agencies, for the security forces to carry out their work in that circumstances. Prosecuting those persons, who I believe honestly are pawns, they are not the real instigators. For us to identify those real instigators, intelligence needs to come in. So while I believe that those persons too should be prosecuted, what is even more important is to identify the instigators using intelligence and then put out those intelligence as best as you can in public, and then of course we prosecute them. If we don't do that, then sadly this cycle is not going to end. The deterrence element within our criminal justice system and the traditional justice system has failed almost completely, and the best way to reverse that and ensure that that deterrence is reinvigorated is to use intelligence, identify the instigators, identify those that are bringing in weapons or even contracting these criminal elements, present that evidence in a in a competent court of jurisdiction, and then have that competent court of jurisdiction prosecute the person. It's not the role of the military. Yes, the police and the other internal security agencies can play that role, but it will be a combination of them and our intelligence agencies. And I'm hoping that the presidency will pick this up, issue tasking orders with clear mandates and timelines for the production of this type of evidence and for the prosecution of both the instigators, those that are involved in gun running, and then anyone who has a hand in the carnage that we're seeing in Plateau State, irrespective of his religious or ethnic identity.
Right. And because you've talked about intelligence, and reacting to the last attack in December, the Chief of Defense Staff said the Nigerian Army did not have sufficient intelligence to foil some of these attacks. I'd like to know, and for better perspective, what is the place of or significance of intelligence in all this?
Intelligence is at the center of any security operation. If you get it right, a significant percentage of that success will be attributed to intelligence. Have
we been getting it right?
Again, I'm a private individual. But I can tell you that I run a firm, Beacon Security Intelligence Limited. We have a requisite of intelligence. And we know, for instance, we're able to tell you what is happening on the plateau. A lot of what I've said is based on the intelligence that is available to me. And that's just a private individual using mainly open sources. The government has at its disposal closed sources that I can never claim I have. So if the intelligence community is doing its work right, which unfortunately I don't know. Even if I know, I'm not going to say it in public. Then I want to think that we've got the intelligence. We know who is behind this. We know who the instigators are, and of course we know we have the evidence to support any statement. Why we're not doing that? Hopefully, when you invite those that are in government, you can ask them that question. But on a more serious note, intelligence is generated through six elements within the intelligence cycle. And I know, for instance, that even at the state level, the operation, I think Rainbow it's called, is supposed to be an intelligence element that is feeding into the federal intelligence structure. We have the early warning systems. Plateau State has one of the best structures for early warning systems in Nigeria. area. Then at the federal level, you have its own early warning systems. Now, all of these are supposed to fit into the intelligence cycle. Then, if I start naming the government departments that have a mandate for the collection of intelligence, the State Security Service is one of them, the Defense Intelligence Agency. As far as internal intelligence is concerned, all of these have agents in Plateau State. The police too have an intelligence wing. That recently the Inspector General of Police empowered by, I think, deploying Assistant Commissioners of Police to head their units. So all of these are government departments that have the mandate for the collection of intelligence and that are very active in Plateau State. Each of the military units, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, should have intelligence wings as well that have the mandate for collection of intelligence. So on that basis, I can tell you with all sense of responsibility that we don't lack intelligence. There's supposed to be an intelligence fusion center in the Office of the National Security Advisor, where all of these organizations that I've mentioned are supposed to feed in their intelligence. So hopefully the picture is there, the evidence is there, and I've not even spoken about the cyber component of intelligence that I know we also have capabilities for that. Earlier when I spoke about open intelligence, then in today's world you also have the geomapping component where you can use geographical elements to gather intelligence. There's the signal intelligence. We all have these capabilities, I know. So I doubt if the challenge is one of intelligence. Again, I hope that when you invite a government official, you can ask those questions. Perhaps they will be able to tell you in clear terms. At my level, I know that we don't lack the capability for gathering intelligence.
All right, Dr. Abramu, let's take a break so I can allow you to take a glass of water. Tonight I've been speaking with a security expert and Managing Director of Beacon Consulting Limited. Tonight we're focused on the continued killings in Plateau State. We'll take a break and I will be right back.